Good evening, folks. I played another chess game last night, this time at the Worcester Club. I was thinking about being involved in a couple tournaments in April, so I thought I should get in some more games in order to prepare for that. I was on board too, and I had the black pieces against Tom Rizzo, rated 1537. He opened with c4, and I decided to see if I could get into a d-pawn opening by transposition, so I played e6, and after his knight c3 I played d5. And Tom traded on d5 and played d4, which transposes to the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit declined. I played bishop e7. I think that's a move that's normal in the exchange variation, so I thought it should be good here. And Tom played g3. This came as a little bit of a surprise to me. What I expected is for that bishop at some point to be developed somewhere along this diagonal, because white's likely going to have to play e3 to shore up d4 later on in the game anyway. He played g3 though, I played knight f6, and after bishop g2 I played c6. I'd like to develop this bishop to f5, but I was thinking during the game that if I did that, queen b3 would win something maybe, or at least put a lot of pressure on black. So I played c6 first, he played knight f3, and I played bishop to f5, taking over this diagonal. Castle kingside from white, and I castled as well, and he played knight h4. Alright, I didn't expect this move, but what I guess expected even less is that I'd not really have any good moves with this bishop afterwards. I looked around for a while and couldn't find anything I liked. I could play bishop g6, but white's just going to take that bishop, and of course that justifies his placing of the knight on h4. I could try bishop g4, but white can play h3, and if I go to h5, g4, and then take the bishop again. And I guess this is a little bit better version because I've gotten white to play a couple of weakening kingside pawn moves, but I'm still down a bishop. And I don't want to put the bishop on d7, or didn't want to put the bishop on d7 because that would have blocked the development of the queenside knight. And the most natural square, e6, looked iffy to me because of the idea to play f4 with f5 right afterwards with tempo. And I looked at this game with a computer just afterwards because I didn't think at the time that I was going to make a video about it. And the computer doesn't think f4, f5 is amazing, but it also doesn't hate it, which to me justifies my concern about it, because what's going to happen is this f5 is going to give black even less space, and it's going to do so with tempo. The light square bishop's going to have to move again. And I was not looking forward to having to maneuver my pieces around in even less space than I have now. So, oh yeah, and there's one more option. I could have played queen c8 or queen d7, defending the bishop, intending to take back on f5 and control that diagonal with the queen. But then white could have played queen b3, hitting b7, when a retreat from the black queen means that she didn't accomplish very much by going out there to begin with. And the move b6 allows white to have a target on c6, and if that pawn ever goes to c5, it justifies the position of his fianchettoed light-squared bishop by giving him a target on d5. So I played the only other move available. I played bishop back to c8. If white, though, now plays anything other than knight back to f3, he's gained two moves. Maybe this not very useful knight h4 move, and one other of his choice. He did play knight f3 though, and so we've sort of reset things, having wasted two moves each. And I decided to change things up and play my rook to the e-file. It makes sense, I think, because the e-file's half open, and it also frees the f8 square for the queenside knight, which is now going to go to d7, then to f8, and then to either g6 or e6. Tom played rook e1. I guess I'm not a huge fan of that, because it demonstrates his intent to play e4, but then he doesn't actually play that move anytime soon. So maybe the development of his dark squared bishop to g5 would have been better, followed by rook c1, or finding a way to get in this minority attack with b4, b5. But he played rook e1. I played knight bd7, continuing with my plan. And he played queen c2, taking over the diagonal that was previously controlled by my bishop, which makes a lot of sense. It makes sense on its own anyway, but it doesn't make so much sense in combination with his next idea. I played knight f8 and he played knight e5. And the issue with this is that I'm going to put my knight on g6, at which point white's going to be very tempted to trade it off, but that will bring a pawn to a square from which it guards f5, which will allow bishop f5 with tempo. Prior to this, I was thinking about playing g6 as a way to secure that square so I could play bishop f5, but I didn't want to because it created dark square weaknesses on the king side. But now that there's a knight here and I play knight g6, if he trades, as he did in the game, I get that pawn to g6 without creating those dark squared weaknesses I would have created by playing g6 to begin with. h3 from Tom. I'm not too sure about that move. I think I probably would have developed my dark squared bishop if I had been him. Bishop to f5 with tempo. And I was kind of expecting queen b3 here, which I intended to meet with queen b6, when white doesn't really want to allow black to give him doubled isolated pawns on the queen side, so he'd probably be the one initiating the trade. But black also doesn't mind having the a rook activated on this file, and being given the option of going b5, b4 over the next couple of moves. So Tom played queen d1 instead, and I played bishop d6, activating my dark squared bishop. And things are kind of turning around now for black. They were a little shaky at the beginning, I think, but the pieces are starting to become more active. Tom played e3. Okay, so this move I think is not consistent with rook e1. If you're going to play this, then probably it's best to leave the rook on f1 and later put it on, c1, b1, or d1, where it's more active. And I sort of played a move here that I'm not proud of, knight e4. I was thinking at the time that if there were a couple trades here, I'd end up with a rook on e4, which can't be challenged by any white minor piece, and the only way to force that rook off the square is to play f3, but that will give white some kingside pawn weaknesses that I can work on later in the game. However, white, of course, doesn't have to trade twice on e4, and Tom didn't, and he played a much better move. Well, okay, I'm not sure it's a better move, but it shows why my move doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, that would make it a better move, wouldn't it? Okay, I don't know. I played knight takes c3 as an in-between move. I didn't really want to retreat the bishop and allow a capture on e4 that would have to be responded to with d takes e4. I think that would be okay. In fact, might even be good. But I was comfortable with the pawn structure as is, and was not looking to change it for that reason. I played knight takes c3, and after b takes c3, I retreated my bishop to d7, and Tom played e4. If we go back a sec, by capturing on c3 and having white retake, I have moved white's b-pawn from b2 to c3, which helps out his rook, which previously would have been attacking a well-defended pawn on c6, but can now target this weakness on b7. And it gives him the option of playing c4 as another pawn break. So this is, I think, pretty bad play on my part. After Tom's e4, I took, and he took back with his rook, and I activated my queen on the queen side with queen a5, hitting the c-pawn, letting white know that I may take the a-pawn if he plays rook b1 later, connecting the rooks so that I can trade on e4 and then bring my other rook into the game, activating the final piece. Tom played bishop to d2. He will now be revealing an attack on the queen if he ever plays c4. I traded on e4, and after bishop takes e4, played rook e8. And things are changing here slowly. They were not so good for black, and they've been kind of okay. But now that black's rook is more active than white's, black's queen is more active than white's, probably this bishop is better than the bishop on d2. things are looking good. The only problem left is this bishop on d7, which will have to be traded off. And that brings me to a point I want to make, which is that it's clear in this position for each player which of his bishops is good and which bad. This is White's bad bishop. He'd like to trade it for the bishop on d6, which is Black's good bishop. And Black would like to make this trade, his bad light squared bishop, for White's good one. So, after c4, it's probably clear to you why I didn't play bishop to b4, which was otherwise an option. White would trade that bishop off. Let's take a look at that. Bishop takes b4, queen takes b4, and then maybe queen c2, defending the c4 pawn, and White's now ready to play rook b1, and he has made the minor piece trade he wants to make. Instead, I played queen d8, with a vague idea that I might later on excuse me, play bishop to b8 and queen c7 and go after his king on the dark squares. Tom played bishop d3, which I think was a mistake. This bishop is an important defender of the white king. And there's a saying that it is, and this is true, that it tends to be significantly harder to checkmate an opponent on the king side when he has a fianchettoed bishop. That's because that bishop guards all sorts of squares right around the king that you might want to use for that checkmate. So with this bishop on g2, there's not much concern that the white king is going to get in serious trouble. But what Tom did instead is play bishop d3, and that leaves the king without any nearby defenders. I played queen f6, hitting this pawn on d4, and depriving the white queen of the f3 square. Okay, Tom can defend this pawn a couple ways. It turns out it's kind of a weird position in that he can't defend it with anything other than the dark squared bishop. And bishop c3 didn't look so hot to me because of queen f4 heading into White's position, though he might be able to survive here with king f1 and after queen h2, queen f3. So he played the other move, bishop to e3. But this opens up something else, which is maybe a later sacrifice on e3. In fact, if you look at it right now, rook takes e3, f takes e3, I can go queen h4. And I think this would just be winning for Black were it not for the fact that White can play the defensive queen f3. So seeing that, I resolved to wait for White to move his queen away to somewhere on the queen side, at which point he wouldn't be able to play queen f3, and then I was going to sack on e3, or at least strongly consider it. Yeah, and I've got to find something to do with this bishop on d7. It's a piece of garbage. But I don't really want to play c5, as that would invite d5 from White, giving him a protected passed pawn, and wouldn't give me any squares to use for my bishop. So I just kind of have to wait around and maybe encourage White to make another mistake, which would allow me to activate the light squared bishop. I played bishop c7, intending to play queen d6 and queen h2, maybe. But as I said, queen f3 is a strong defensive move in those situations for White, so I'm not sure I actually would have done that. What I really wanted was to convince White that it'd be a good idea to play c5, taking the d6 square away from me, and that's what he did. Because this gives me some light squares to work with, and now I can reactivate the bishop on d7. I played bishop to e6, intending bishop d5. Tom corrected, I think, an earlier error by playing bishop f1, intending to bring this bishop back to the defense of the king. Bishop d5, bishop g2. And if we kind of freeze things again and take another look at the position, I think it's clear that Black is better here. White's got a backwards pawn on d4. He has 3 pawn islands to Black's 2. He has a weaker king. Black's dark squared bishop is better. Black's rook is better. Black's queen is better. And Black's bishop is, well, probably about to be traded off for the white one, in which case it doesn't matter. I played queen to d8, intending to have my queen take over the responsibility for controlling the light squares if there's an exchange, and maybe intending now bishop to b8 and queen c7, getting into h2 from different squares on that diagonal. Tom traded on d5, I played queen takes d5, and he played rook b1. All right, so this is, I mean, it's natural to look for counterplay, so I like this idea. Unfortunately, the nature of the position is such that black can play b5 here, and white has two bad options. One of them is to leave the pawn on b5, in which case black's weakness on b7 has been turned into a strength. The other is to do what Tom did, which is to take on b6 en passant. But then after a takes b6, these pawns are significantly safer than these ones, and black should have a big edge here. Tom played queen b3, finally leaving the defense of the king side with his queen, which was the signal I had set aside in my mind that I could probably launch a kingside attack. So I played queen to d6, intending queen h2. Tom played king f1. I invaded anyway with queen h2, and remember that back when the queen was on d1, this invasion was answered by queen f3, when white's queen is more active than black's. But here that move's not possible. And Tom made a big mistake here. He wanted to, I think, defend this pawn on h3 with his queen, so he moved the dark squared bishop out of the way to d2, but that allows the black rook to control the e-file, which makes queen h1 checkmate. All right, that was round one. There are going to be 4 rounds in that tournament. There won't be one next week, so I won't be bringing you a game from that club anyway, but I'll bring you the Fitchburg one from Wednesday. I don't know if I'll be involved in all of the rounds of these 2 tournaments coming up because I just got hired for a new job, so I'm going to be starting that soon. But I'll bring you whatever games I play. Thanks a lot.